Death is a scientific impossibility. What's going on, guys? It's Marcus here with Discover Ignite, where we discover possibilities, ignite change. And today I got one of those books for you that's going to really get your mind, those wheels really running, and I can guarantee you it is quite intriguing. Now, the book I'm actually reviewing today is called Is There Life After Death by Anthony Peake. So hold on, stick tight, and let's get this book review started. So I know the first question you're probably asking is, why would Marcus read a book like this? And that's a good question, because I don't even know why I gravitated towards this book, right? I was doing some research on something and I come across Anthony Peake, and I heard him in one of his talks, his theories about death, and it was really intriguing, and it led me to his book. You know, he's this guy, he essentially dedicates his whole life to the studies of the quantum realm and life after death and a bunch of other things that are out there. He also studies the particles and stuff, in which, people talk about, the light speed, E equals mc squared, and all those other different theories out there, in trying to put some kind of explanation behind everything. And he does it really good in his book. Now, when you hear about the title, right? When you hear the title, Life After Death, it's such a morbid thing. You don't want to talk about death. Nobody wants to talk about death, right? Unless it happens to you close, someone you love, then, you start to think about it a little bit more. You start to appreciate those little things in life. But nonetheless, this book is nothing at all like that. And that is what's so intriguing, right? It goes back to the whole the theory that there is no really death, right? It's scientifically impossible. And, Anthony Peake goes into this perfectly about discussing essentially a particle, and the fact that even, particles don't even exist until you concentrate on that particle. And this is where the book starts off. The book starts off here, and then he gradually builds up to more and more, just eventually going into, life in general and time, and that we are the same way. We go back to that particle. Everything is essentially back to that particle, that particle does not exist unless you actually focus energy on it, and that the time that you're actually in does not exist only because you are focusing on that specific time. Now, this will really throw you for a loop, because it extremely threw me for a loop. And again, reading, 2/3 of the book, it didn't even talk about death. And I was like, this is really intriguing. But it kept going. It kept tagging you along into understanding that we are all essentially energy, and that energy is always there. And at that time, this is what really threw me in this book, was the fact that, you're concentrating on one part of your time. And I don't recall what exactly it is, but there's a particular snake, you might have seen it, where it's, essentially churning and eating itself, right? But you focus on a chunk of essentially that snake, right? You're focusing on that point in your life. This is why they say before you die that you have a flash of your whole life right before your eyes before you die, because it's all essentially looped together. And then he goes into, life after death towards the tail end of the book, and interviews or talks about specific people that have actually experienced life after death and have come back to life, and they always say the same thing. So he talks about a lot of different things in this book. He talks about, how the similarities essentially between birth and death, right before death, and that the fact that we could possibly be living in our own heads, right? Essentially like the Matrix. And I think that's what really throws you off, because there's really no explanation for a lot of different things. And I don't want to lose you guys by talking, some conspiracy theory stuff. A lot of the stuff he does have in the book is very scientifically proven, and he goes over the results of that. And that's what really made the book really good, is the fact that, not only was it really interesting, but there are scientific facts that back all the stuff that he talks about in this book. And I think that's what I was drawn to Anthony Peake in the first place and started reading this book, because all this research that he had was actually backed by science. And for in my mind, there's again a lot of things that can't be explained, but when you can start seeing scientific facts behind it, you start believing a little bit more. I think as humans, we believe in those things that are scientifically proven. And so this book is one of those books that really gets you thinking, because they have different scenarios that they talk about. They talk about that particle, right? And they talk about how that particle doesn't exist until you actually focus it in on a microscope, and then you can see it because of that, because the fact it really doesn't exist essentially is divided into two different dimensions, right? Until you focus on and concentrate on it, does it actually become something? And so this is what really gets your head spinning or reading this whole book, because it goes about all those different things in your life. There's actually one really intriguing part about this book, and he talks the fact that you're living a life in which you cannot really die, right? He essentially talks about like you're living a life that's in the Matrix, but all these different things that are going on in life that you can't actually physically die. And it is really weird the way he describes it, right? Like you see things, you experience things in life to prevent you from just doing specific things. But you're like essentially creating your own world within your head, but you don't know it. And there's some really interesting scientific research behind this, and again, it really throws you for a loop when you start thinking about stuff like this. I've read a couple other books about this, about time, and the Albert Einstein book about dreams, I believe it was called, and it talks about time, just perspective on time. And this book, it really puts time, it puts death, it puts everything, and loops it all together, and just realizing that you don't really die. We're all just energy from the start anyway. And I don't want to give too much of the book. I mean, I talked about a lot, but there's still a lot of detail in this book that will really intrigue you and will cause you to want to reread it over and over, because it's, again, if you are into that kind of stuff, this book will really get you thinking about the way stuff works scientifically, right? How life is essentially created and how we essentially pass on, right, to what we may think is that afterlife, when in fact we are all just energy, and what exactly happens. And so as far as like any cons to this particular book, I must say there wasn't any cons, right? I remember purchasing the book, and I think it actually took me a while to actually read it, because I was like, I don't know why I would buy a book on death. And then I picked it up and I started reading it. Like, all right, the first one's going to be death. It's just going to start talking about death, right? And then you start getting like, a quarter of the way through the book, halfway through the book, and like, wait, this book has not even talking about death. Like, why would they say, life after death? And then no real true part of the book is about death. And then you get towards the end, you're like, okay, well, there it is. I was waiting for that the whole book. And you realize that, man, this book was actually really good. And so if you guys are actually interested in this book, I will leave it down in the description below. And if you guys did enjoy this video, remember to hit that like button on your way out. Till next time, I will see you guys later.